There's an ache that doesn't speak in words. It moves through the body like static. It sits beneath the skin like weight. It shows up not as sorrow, but as craving for something, anything, to fill the silence inside. We think of addiction as a chemical dependency, as a weakness, a moral failing, a pattern of poor choices. But Carl Jung saw something deeper. He saw addiction not as a disease, but as a spiritual emergency, a desperate attempt to reconnect with a self that had gone missing. He wrote, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism." Because to Jung, the object didn't matter. It wasn't about the drug. It was about the disconnection from the self, from the soul, from the source of meaning. Addiction is not about pleasure. It's about escape, not from the world, but from yourself. And the tragedy? We don't become addicts because we love the high. We become addicts because the low is too unbearable to face. So we reach for the bottle, for the phone, for the binge, for the scroll, for the rush of validation, the flood of distraction, the illusion of control. And beneath it all is a quiet voice that says, "I can't be with myself. I don't know how." You don't crave the substance. You crave what it numbs, the shame, the guilt, the unbearable emptiness that creeps in when the world gets quiet. And Jung knew, you can't medicate a soul wound with surface solutions. You can't fix a shattered psyche with discipline alone, because what's broken is not your willpower. It's your relationship to pain. Addiction is grief that was never given permission to breathe. The fragmented self and the role of the shadow. No one wakes up one day and chooses to fall apart. It happens slowly, in tiny fractures, in quiet compromises. One part of you learns how to smile. Another part hides the rage. One part becomes the achiever. Another carries the despair. And eventually, you don't know which version of yourself is real anymore. You just know you're tired, and the mask is starting to slip. Jung called this fragmentation of the self, the separation between who you truly are and who you had to become to survive. It's not just behavioral, it's spiritual. Because when the psyche splits, when the shadow is exiled, the soul begins to starve, and a starving soul will feed on anything. Addiction then becomes not just a craving for sensation, but a longing to feel whole, to feel real, even for a moment. That's what the addict is chasing, not the substance, not the thrill, but the reunion. But here's the paradox. The more you chase wholeness through external relief, the further you drift from your inner truth. Because every time you bypass the pain, you strengthen the shadow. Every time you run from your sorrow, you deepen your disconnection. You're not just numbing the sadness, you're silencing the self. And yet, addiction persists, not because you're weak, but because no one taught you how to sit with the discomfort. Carl Jung understood this with piercing clarity. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And so we scroll, we drink, we gamble, we lie, we escape, instead of descend. But Jung's path is not escape, it is descent into the pain, into the chaos, into the wound. Because only through facing what we fear do we remember what we are. Addiction as a misguided search for God. There's a longing that lives beneath the craving, deeper than the substance, older than the trauma. It's not for pleasure, it's for reconnection. Jung once said, the alcoholic's craving for alcohol is the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness. Expressed in medieval language, the union with God. Addiction, then, is not about weakness. It's about yearning for union, for transcendence, for meaning. We don't reach for the drug because we're broken. We reach because we've forgotten the truth of who we are. And in a world that severs us from our soul, that numbs the sacred, that mocks stillness and profits off pain, reaching for the wrong thing almost starts to make sense, because at least it fills the void. At least it soothes the ache, even if just for a moment. But Jung's path isn't about quick relief. It's about return. Return to the self. Return to source. Return to the place within that addiction has always tried to replicate from the outside. You see, the addict is not chasing destruction. They are chasing union. But because they don't know where to look, they substitute God with chemicals, substitute presence with performance, substitute truth with temporary highs. And the tragedy? They don't realize they were never empty to begin with. They just forgot how to sit still long enough to feel full again. The path to healing addiction is not paved with punishment. It's paved with remembrance. The goal isn't abstinence. The goal is integration, to bring the shadow into the light, to bring the ache into awareness, to bring the soul back into the conversation, because no pill, no drink, no scroll can replace the feeling of being truly whole. Why the addict becomes the wounded healer. Carl Jung believed that the person who breaks is often the one most capable of healing, but only if they're willing to confront what broke them, because in the brokenness, something sacred is revealed. The addict, if they survive the descent, if they choose to turn inward instead of numbing outward, can become something extraordinary, a mirror, a mystic, a healer, not despite the addiction, but because of it. In ancient mythology, there was a figure called the wounded healer, one who could only heal others through the wisdom they gained from their own pain. Jung loved this archetype. He saw it everywhere, in addicts who became therapists, in sufferers who became teachers, in broken hearts that birthed whole compassion, because once you've been to the bottom, you no longer fear the dark. You understand it. You speak its language. You recognize it in others, not with judgment, but with recognition. But here's the part no one glamorizes. Becoming the wounded healer requires brutal honesty. You can't fake your way into wholeness. You can't intellectualize your trauma and call it transcendence. You have to feel it, grieve it, bleed it out of your system, so your nervous system can learn safety again. Addiction is what happens when the wound gets locked in a cycle of avoidance. Healing is what begins when you finally say, I'm ready to face the thing I've been running from. That moment of surrender, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet turning inward. That's when the alchemy begins. You stop reaching for the external. You stop blaming the pain. You stop identifying as the broken one. And you start remembering that the same place that hurt you is the place where your medicine now lives. The return to self and the end of the cycle. There's a silence that follows the spiral. Not the silence of numbness, but the silence of return. After the chase is over, after the highs collapse, after the distractions lose their grip, you're left with yourself, your breath, your memory, your shadow, your truth. And maybe for the first time, you don't run. You don't pick up the drink. You don't open the app. You don't chase the next hit of validation. You just sit with the ache, with the echo, with the part of you that once believed you were too far gone to ever come back. And in that stillness, something ancient awakens. Not the addict, not the mask, not the performance, the self, the original self, the one that Jung said was always whole beneath the persona, always waiting beneath the noise. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That's the privilege the addict gets. If they choose return over relapse, awareness over avoidance, depth over escape. And now the cycle ends, not with force, not with punishment, but with remembrance. You no longer confuse pleasure with peace. You no longer trade your pain for another distraction. You no longer see your past as evidence of who you are, but as a map to where you came from. You reclaim it. You reintegrate. You alchemize it all into a nervous system that knows how to hold presence again. This is not perfection. This is individuation. This is what Jung devoted his life to. The moment you stop running from the unconscious and instead return to it with reverence. If something deep inside you stirred while listening to this, don't scroll past it. This isn't just another video. It's a reflection, a transmission, a message that came not by accident but by resonance. Carl Jung reminded us that we meet ourselves over and over again, often in the most unexpected places. Maybe this was one of those moments. A mirror, a pause, a quiet opening into who you've always been beneath the noise. If your soul feels seen here, write it. I let go. I align. I remember. Not for attention, not for likes, but to speak directly to your own subconscious. Like this video not for validation, but to embody the truth you just heard. Subscribe, not because you need more content, but because you're ready for deeper clarity, deeper healing, and deeper return. This isn't just a channel. It's a remembering space. A place where those who are done performing finally come home to themselves. And if you know someone who's still chasing everything except themselves, share this with them. Because as Jung said, those who look outside dream. Those who look inside awaken. And maybe, just maybe, this is your awakening. In a culture that glorifies doing, stillness is rebellion. In a world addicted to chasing, remembering is power. So pause, breathe, and trust this. You were never missing anything. You were only ever meant to return.